It's showtime. So here we are, May 20th, 2021, close to the end of the school year, and we are live with ICC Hen Chess Banter Blitz. And tonight we have a very special program for you. We're going to take a look. As we all know, the candidates recently finished, and the Russian Grandmaster, who is leading at the halfway point, Neopomniachtchi, emerged victorious. And so we're definitely going to go ahead and take a look at the upcoming match with Magnus Carlsen. This will be Magnus Carlsen's 5th World Championship match. Just checking a couple things, making sure we are recording. Yes, we are. We are good to go. So it has been announced the World Chess Championship match will take place in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, from November 24th to December 15th, 16th, that is. And I believe I saw something to the effect that the prize fund was $2.4 million, which is quite conceivable and very well deserved. After all, these two players out of millions, hundreds of millions of chess players in the world have risen to the top. So, who is this guy Neopomniachtchi that is now playing? Well, first off, their next game that they will play in person will be at the $320,000 FTX Crypto Cup, which has been organized and has an extra 100,000 Bitcoins thrown in by the sponsor. That'll be a tournament where they have the top 16 players in the world playing off against each other, and that will be coming literally right around the corner. The first kickoff there, round 1, is May 23rd, but as early as round 2, I believe Magnus Carlsen and Neopomniachtchi will be squaring off. Okay? So, the next thing we wanted to take a look at is we'll go ahead and take a look at some of Neopomniachtchi's games and his accomplishments. So, one of the things that I like here is that we can go to Actions or View. Under View, we have My Profile. This is one of the really nice features I like about ICC. Here we have General. Gives, your rundown at various time controls and so forth. Then, and some stats. Then we have Games. Now here we have our most recent games. The most recent games here being some practice spot games. And then prior to that, we have some games from probably the last Banter Blitz session a week ago. But another useful feature is the game library. And in here, I store all the games from the presentations, games, and positions.
Server announcement.
The last few presentations, we've looked at in-games, in-game compositions in particular. This week, we're going to look at some of Neopomniachtchi's games and some of their mono-e-mono games with Magnus Carlsen. So let's talk about who Neopomniachtchi is, okay? Tremendous talented player. It's been known for quite some time that his talent is on level of, Magnus and so forth. In fact, they grew up together. They're very good friends, okay? And they even played in the 2000 Under-12 World Championship, European Under-10. But in the Under-12 Championship for the world in 2002, Neopomniachtchi won on tiebreak over Magnus Carlsen. Other junior titles he has to his credit is European Under-10 in 2000, European Under-12 in 2001-2002. He was the Russian Under-18 champion in 2004. He was the Russian champion in 2010 and 2020, European champion in 2010, He got the IM title in 2004 and the Grandmaster title at 2007. Probably would have made him about 16 or 17 years old. Okay, so he started playing chess at the very young age of 4, and he's been coached during the past few years by one of Russia's most reputable coaches, Sergei Janovsky, and he lists Mikhail Tal as his favorite player. Now, first we'll take a look at a game from his youth. The game we're going to look at is against Kharitonov. Now, I remember when I worked with Karpov in one of the matches in the 1990s, Kharitonov was, a good 25-50 GM, and he was on our team. Let's take a look. So where is this game from? This game is from a Russian team championship in 2009. Nepo's playing white, and Kharitonov is playing black. The game opens as a Caro-Kann. You get a position after c4, the Panov-Botvinnik attack. And we get a fairly thematic position that could come from either a Nimzo-Indian or, as in this case, a Caro-Kann. Pawn takes, knight takes, bishop d2. Godikomsky in the 1996 match, leading up to that, with Karpov, was very, very fond of playing the white side of this and won some brilliant victories. As you can see, white has the isolated pawn on d4, but black has a nice blockading square on d5. Bishop to d3, white has freer development, and black has to solve the problem of the d7 bishop. Castles, castles, a3. Now you can see two attackers on the d4 pawn. White ignores that, sets up the queen and bishop battery, threatening to take down on h7. g6. But now, this dark squared bishop finds a very nice, useful employment. Black moves the rook away, and white plays rook over. Now, black could play to try and win this pawn, but there are some tactics. For example, knight takes, bishop takes. Maybe bishop b5 is a bit annoying, attacking the rook on the bishop. Nonetheless, Kharitonov decides to bring the knight back. Knight to e4, trade the dark squared bishops, pluses and minuses. When you have the isolated pawn, you don't necessarily want to trade a lot of pieces, but you definitely want to trade those dark squared bishops because that weakens the dark squares around the black king. And if white hopes to win this game, it's usually some kind of attack on the king. Well, you can see in return for the isolated pawn, Neopiminachi is beautifully centralized with everyone ideally placed. Knight up, knight back, knight into e5, typical outpost maneuver, and then queen to d2. Now, possible that somewhere along here he should consider knight takes, trying to alter the pawn structure. But now leaving that knight on the board leads to some interesting
server announcement.
For example, you can see there's already a threat to play knight takes on f7, rook takes, and then knight takes e6 check with a royal fork. Krunks Lannister is here. Good evening, sir. Tonight what we're going to do for a bit is we're going to do a preview of the Carlsen Neopiminachi World Championship match coming up in December. Right now we are looking at the game from 2009 Russian Team Championship, Neopiminachi versus Kharitonov. Now, of course, he doesn't have quite the name recognition that Magnus Carlsen has, but he's been very close to that level for quite some time. And if we look at his Blitz rating, his active chess rating, his rapid chess rating, they're all right there at 2780. So, after knight g5, knight back. Now this is not a great square for the knight, but it does guard the e6 pawn. Rook to the c file. Now, of course, can't play queen takes pawn you have rook takes knight. So he plays the other knight blockading. But the problem is if that knight is blockading, what is the knight on c7 doing? It's not so well placed. So bishop to e4, pinning that knight. Queen up to d6. I'm sure there were some exciting complications with f6, but queen d6 definitely is a mistake. Now, white uncorks. Bam! Knight at g takes f7. Let's go to the video replay. Bam! Knight at g takes f7. Yes, he was threatening rook c7. Now, after rook takes,
check.
Queen h6 check. Boom! Now, if he takes that, you have knight takes rook check. Okay, so in the game he backs up, but this is just hopeless. He plays knight takes, king takes, and now most players would play queen takes check and bishop takes g6, but Nepo points out,
check.
as Crunks Lannister says, bam, rook takes c7. If the knight takes, you just play bishop takes on b7. Or queen takes pawn check first, shatters kingside, and then take on b7. So he has to take with a queen, but now his queen, once you take out the knight, is on an unprotected skewer square. And he's unable to play bishop takes d5 because of queen h7 check and queen takes on c7. So basically this means white has to retreat.
Check.
And it's just a hopeless case because he's 2 pawns down. So we'll just zip through the rest. And this brings to the point, one of the reasons why Nepo is very dangerous to Carlsen is that Nepo has excellent in-game technique. As we will see in this game, he wraps it up, allows no counterplay. Now, of course, right there, if you take the pawn, rook to d1, pin and win, plays rook d6, starts protecting and bringing the king to the center. Rook drops back, king goes in, bishop back, rook over, pawn up, and now he pins. But he's not worried about winning that pawn because if black wins that pawn, he's still going to be 1 pawn up in the king ending. Plays over, anticipating the h-file opening, but Nepo's full speed ahead. Because once he gets a pawn to g5 check, his king will post up on e5. Takes, bishop takes,
check.
Rook takes. So now we can see Nepo has converted his advantage to a rook in game. But notice, rook e2, no counterplay. Rook h4 can be met by rook to g2 if you deem it necessary. He goes rook in, he goes pawn up,
check.
Now switches to the c-file, and he resigns. Well, what would happen now? For example, if he
check,
you would just simply run around.
Check.
Then when you get to this position, you're already threatening king c7 and pawn up, and black's not going to be able to defend. For example, if he goes back, he could just go here, and now he could try to stop the check, but then you check. If he keeps the rook on the file, you just go ahead and check, knock him back to the f-file, and score the goal. So, a very nice attacking game from about 11 years ago by Nepo. So that shows part of the reason why he is a very dangerous player. Okay? Now, one of the things is that when I saw that he was the challenger, I remembered that, yes, as Crunks Lannister points out, Botvinnik saying, don't give a centimeter of counterplay. Good point. Kill their counterplay, kill their hope. So, but one of the things that I'd remembered, even though I didn't remember a lot of his specific games, was that I was impressed that he was a very good in-game player. So now we're going to look at 2 games that I already had in my in-game databases before I even knew he was the challenger. This is another one of the reasons why I think he's a real a present and clear danger to Magnus Carlsen's World Championship title. This game goes to rook and bishops of opposite color, an area that Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana have won a lot of games with. Okay, and in this position, computers actually evaluated as equal. White has more space, but the knight on d4 is well placed, so it helps to neutralize the bishop pair. Black, Grandmaster Vidit, good 2650 Indian Grandmaster, plays bishop takes, going for the opposite colored bishops, and then plays bishop d7. Pawn to c4, pawn to b6 might not have been the right approach, and then king up. Black king's trying to find a little safety. He wants to play rook to the a-file, contest the a-file, but now Nepo strikes. Bam! Pawn to c5. Well, pawn to c5 obviously threatens pawn to c6, so pawn takes, and now he plays c6 to liquidate. But what to do? If he plays pawn takes on c5, you have rook b2 check, and then when he goes king c8, going to the a-file is just asking for rook d3 and rook a3 with a rook roller checkmate. So after pawn takes, rook check, king back, white will simply play rook to c4, followed by rook takes c5, and the pawn on c7 is under heavy, heavy pressure. So in the game, black plays c6. But now comes pawn takes pawn on b6, pawn takes on d5, and then a very, very nice move. Internet Chess Club is here. Hey, Sandro, you guys are up late. Oh no, what happened there? Okay, can't have our chessboard disappearing. I remember in one of these broadcasts I inadvertently disconnected. So, not a good experience that night. Anyway, very nice move, bishop to e3. That way he's got a little protection here, indirect protection. Well, black follows through in trying to contest the file. But now comes a very nice move, rook
check
to a7 check. Beautiful touch. Now, very nice to note that if king takes pawn, you have rook to b4 double check. The bishop will protect the rook. He's not able to interpose because it's going to be double check. When the king goes to c6, bam, rook to b6, checkmate. So in the game, he plays rook takes. If we go back, what were the other choices? Well, if he goes king to c6, then you have probably something like rook c7 check, king over, bishop f4 check, and then at some point you push that d7 pawn, that b7 pawn. So in the game, he trades, but now of course king takes pawn, just simply rook takes d5 check and rook takes bishop. So he goes bishop c6, hoping to steal the pawn. But now a little tenderizer, touching the g7 pawn, rook to g8, king up, and now rook over. Now rook over to b4 sets up a very nice threat. The threat is rook to b8, after which rook takes rook is met by bishop f4 check, followed by pawn takes rook equals queen. So black has to do something. So he played bishop to b7, blocking the file. But then came a very nice
check
touch. Bishop check, king c6, and then very unusual angle, bishop to a5, threatening simply rook to b6 check. This was actually the point where Vidit resigned. But let me go ahead and share with you what I think is a fairly typical, very artistic variation. Rook a8, logical, attacking the pawn.
Check.
Then you have rook check. Now, of course, the king must go back to c7 to guard the bishop, and then you play rook
check
over to f6 check. Now, you would think that you're trying to steal the f7 pawn. If the king goes to d7, of course, you'll take that pawn with check. Be very happy to. But the nice part is when he goes king back, hoping you play rook takes pawn, and he plays rook takes pawn with survival chances. No, 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 no. This is the danger of rook and bishop opposite color. Beautiful domination theme. Black king is threatened with mate. His light squared bishop can't move because the c6 and a6 squares are covered by the rook. See, this bishop can't go to either of these squares without being captured. And when he plays rook takes pawn,
Checkmate.
bam! Kind of a version of the Paul Morphy mate. So, as I mentioned, this is one of the reasons I feel that Ian Neapomachi, I mean, there's no question about his talent. As Kasparov and Magnus both said, previously he was considered a bit, rash. But over the last few years, his level has increased. He's calmed down. He plays with a lot more patience. And from my perspective, he plays in games very well. And so that means he's definitely a danger. His rapid play and blitz play is much stronger than Karjak and Fabiano Caruana. So therefore, Magnus won't be able to just run out the series of games and then expect to win in tiebreak. So let's see the other end game that I had for you. And again, I would say that I'd come across these games and really liked these games prior to even realizing that he was going to be the next challenger to Magnus Carlsen. So here's a game against well-respected Russian Grandmaster Fedosiev, who's probably about 2,700, right on the edge. And yeah, usually I do shower during the day. Crunks Lannister is asking if we could do the shower a little earlier. But the problem with doing the show earlier is I have a school obligation that I have to take. Maybe we could take it under advisement for the summer. Okay. Now, what's going on in this position? Material's equal. White has the better pawn structure with 2 pawn islands versus 3. White has slightly better king safety, but black does have center pawns. Let's see how play unfolds here. And where was this from? This was from, also from Russian Team Championship 2009. Okay. So, bishop to f3, d3, forcing the trade of bishops. Well, bishop takes,
check.
Queen takes, and then pawn to f5. Pluses and minuses. The pawn on f5, well, that secures the pawn. Blocks that diagonal to the king. The downside is the pawn on e6 is a touch back. Okay, Crunks Lannister, we will catch up with you later. Okay, thanks for dropping in. Rook over. White's a little bit better here. Not big, but a little. Queen back. Now he goes probing. Queen a6. That threatens to take the pawn on e6. It also threatens to play queen takes the pawn on a5. After rook to a8, queen over. Now he's still threatening to take this pawn on e6. He plays rook over, chasing the queen. Queen back to c5. Rook back, protecting. And now just simply rook to e2. Notice that if black advances his e5 pawn, the white queen is in position to snap the d5 pawn. Hence the move queen to d7. But then doubling rooks. Now if the e5 pawn advances, it can be captured. Rook up, more lateral protection for the pawn. Notice there that if you take queen takes on a4, your queen gets far away from your king, and after queen c7 check, the king moves. You have a simple move, pawn to h3, and then you're threatening take on e6, and the black king is very exposed. So after rook up, pawn to h3 anyway, same idea. Rook over, pawn to b4, creating a passed pawn on this side. Black starts moving his pawn. And so these kind of positions to me are extremely murky, very unclear. And this is a second reason why Nepo is a real danger to Carlsen, because he's very at home in these wild, crazy, out-of-control type positions. In fact, his favorite player was Mikhail Tal. So let's see. Pawn up. T-Big Mag looks like he has perfect style to have a good chance with Magnus. Oh, absolutely. Wait till you see their heads-up scores. So, pawn to b5. Rook over. Pawn up. Push. Rook over. Queen back. Rook over. Queen over. Now, queen over threatens the pawn on e5. Now, not clear to me why he didn't play pawn to e4. Oh, but there is a nasty threat of rook to c7. That's the problem. Okay, so he plays rook takes, queen takes, but now at least he's split those center babies up, and he's still threatening the nasty rook c7. Rook e4. But now, the shot. Plays queen f6, and on rook g6, he hits him with rook takes d3. This wins a vital pawn. Well, how does this work? Well, it's a king exposure issue, because if queen takes on d3, he has the killer rook c7 check. King back, queen takes rook check, leads to mate in about 2 more moves. So as a result, black just has to accept the loss of a pawn, but not only is that a pawn, it's a monster b pawn, and the black king is still exposed. After king up, rook behind the passed pawn, rook over, rook back. This move is very reminiscent of the rook back move that he played in the previous game we saw, eliminating enemy counterplay. If you push the pawn, black wants to play rook check, trade a pair of rooks, put his rook behind your pawn, and then how do you win? Your king is boxed in, and your pawn can't advance anymore. So very nice move, rook back. Totally the kind of move goes underappreciated, but now, without the fear of these rooks getting back behind, the pawn to b7 is a very, very real threat. So black is the one who has to actually drop back and blockade. But now the white rooks are able to go forward again. Rook up, tries to get his king in, king up, and let's see, somewhere around here black actually resigned, but we'll just show sample variation as to what would happen. Rook over, that threatens rook to c8.
Check.
When he goes check in there, tries to take that, tries to get some counterplay.
Check.
No way, Jose. You go for the
checkmate
attack. Okay? And again, as we mentioned in our previous presentations on rook endings, this is very typical of one of the advantages of having 2 rooks on the board versus a single rook ending, is sometimes you have possibilities for mating nets. So we can see he's a very, very good in-game player, very, very good, especially in bishops opposite color situations, and he also has kind of a wilder attacking style. Now, let's take a look at their heads up and see what that looks like. So when I first heard he was the challenger, I was a little bit surprised to find out that he actually had a plus score in classical games, something like 4-1 with 6 draws. However, at faster time controls, Magnus Carlsen has a pretty substantial 21-14 with 37 draws. Okay, so it's going to be a real fight. And Gary Kasparov, in a very recent interview, mentioned that that a couple of things. One, they've known each other for quite a while. Magnus even invited Nepo to help him in one of the matches, I think the second match with Anand. And this can be a real disadvantage for the champion because the other guy knows how he thinks. And of course, the interviewer said this to Kasparov in reference to Kramnik, and Kasparov was, yes, thanks for reminding me, because Kramnik had actually assisted Kasparov, and that gave him a huge advantage in understanding how Kasparov thinks, and he was able to tailor his preparation accordingly. So that's another thing that makes Nepo very dangerous. That and the fact that he's got a plus score, so he has no fear. There's no intimidation factor that's going to be at work here. Like, for example, when Spassky played Fischer in 1972, it was very easy for Spassky to become intimidated. Okay, it would have been easy for Fischer to be intimidated. He'd never beaten Spassky before the match. But on the other hand, Magnus is diversified with other business interests and so forth, but he also has greater World Championship match caliber experience. So it'll be very interesting. I tend to agree with Kasparov here. I think Magnus is still a favorite. I think at the end of the day, he'll still come out ahead. But let's take an example, look at 2 examples of each of their heads-up play against each other. First, we'll see a game from fairly recent, 2017 Blitz tournament in Belgium. Nepo playing white against Magnus Carlsen. Okay, so Nepo plays this. I think Shirov once ventured this against Karpov, and it made Karpov's best games. A nice win with black. Knight out, queen back. And now I think most people play knight f6 here,
check.
But Magnus throws in the check. After knight c3, knight out, bishop out, castles, and yes, white usually castles. Then he looks to play moves like bishop d3, queen to g3, and start building up an attack. And this can be very intimidating if you are not precisely very well prepared, because black is a long way from doing any kind of pawn storming or getting pieces anywhere near the white king. But let's see what happens. However, he does get immediate pressure against the e4 pawn. So rather than play bishop to d3 and just sack the pawn, Nepo just offers it up. Well, Magnus is not afraid to take it. Now notice the typical tactic here of bishop takes knight. If queen takes rook. But if bishop takes knight, you just play ball with rook takes f4. Bishop takes d8, you have knight takes. And black's a pawn ahead and the queens are off the board. No problem. So that typical tactic does not work. So Nepo, of course, retreats the queen. Black expands, looking to get his light squared bishop out. Pawn to f3, very logical move, taking away the g4 and the e4 square, kicking the rook. Rook goes all the way back home. Well, knight to e2. Pawn up to a5. Very interesting play. Knight up to f4. Now it's pretty clear white is going to get the pawn back. He's going to play bishop takes knight and knight takes on d5. Okay, this is pretty clear that black can't really stop this. Okay, but knight to b4. Very timely, because now he's got some knight takes a2 check possibilities. For example, if you play a3, then he can play knight a2 check and chop off your favorite, your beautiful bishop. Well, Nepo goes in for takes, and now a3. Now, most mortals would probably play knight back to c6, but then knight takes d5 is very unpleasant. Also, you could play knight to a6, and then on knight d5, then maybe venture queen to c6. More or less okay. But Magnus goes bishop f5. And here we can see he's really touching up that c2 pawn. Well, Nepo takes the knight. Pawn takes, opening the a file. Takes the pawn.
Check.
Rook check. King up, and bam, queen takes b2. Now the first thing to note after queen takes b2 is that queen takes c2 mate is a very important threat. Now that does bring to mind why white didn't play bishop to d3 here. Well, of course, I guess you just play bishop takes, bishop, king takes, and then what do you do? Probably something like rook back to a3, or no, maybe you just play pawn to b3, and the c2 square is a problem. So in the game, Nepo plays queen takes c7. This way the queen guards the c2 mate square. But then comes rook takes, rook check, and Nepo resigned. Why did he resign? Because after king takes, check, and
checkmate.
Checkmate, as announced by the ICC program. Checkmate ends the game. You can see all three black pieces playing an important role. The white rook, white bishop did not get developed. So that was like a devastating 19 or 20 move defeat. Okay, so one of Magnus's better efforts against Nepo, but you can see a wild and crazy game. Now let's see. Another game that I saw that I quite liked. Magnus is white in this game. Some kind of Sicilian where Magnus won the exchange and they reached this position after about 25 moves. So black has one pawn for the exchange, but the pawn on a6 is a bit weak. He plays rook over to d1. Now, just point in fact, is that the white pieces, major pieces, the valuables, are all on light squares. Black has a dark squared bishop. But one problem for this bishop is it doesn't really have a great outpost. Okay? So, rook to the open file, attacking the queen. Here, Nepo, unfortunately, puts his queen on h6. g6 would have been more prudent. But now, queen
check.
Takes f7 check, and Nepo resigns. The point being, after rook takes, we
check.
have the old back rank check.
Checkmate.
So, two of the nicer examples from Magnus's point of view against Nepo. Yes, I agree. I think we will have some real interesting fighting chess. And that was one of the points that Kasparov made, is that the previous opponents that Carlsen defended his title against, players like Fabiano is very good at attacking if he has it prepared, and it's a prepared line. But by and large, he tends to be more of a strategic maneuvering player. And then the same with Karjakin, is a very strategic maneuvering player. And so these players, the game goes at a slower tempo, tends to be longer games, and that totally plays into Magnus's strength. Whereas with this guy Nepo, as we're going to see from this game and the next game, he's a caveman. He's wild. He's unpredictable. He'll throw everything at you. And yeah, that gives both sides chances to win the game, but that's not Magnus's super comfort zone, okay? So, yes, we may get a Latvian gambit. After all, Tal is his hero, and so it could happen. So, let's take a look.
Check.
Here's a game. Magnus played something ridiculous in the opening, like e4, and then bishop c4, gave away his pawn on e4, sacked a bishop on f7, something really ridiculous. Nepo, so far, has punished him for it, but Magnus sees one chance to fight back. Now, before this move, what's the body count? White has something like a rook, and what is it, 6, 3. So White has a rook and 3 pawns, 8 points in material versus the 3 minor black pieces. So they've been clawing at each other.
Check.
Now, Magnus goes check, bishop takes, rook
check,
and gets his rooks on the 7th rank. Now, of course, he could have played knight back to d7, but Nepo plays very nicely. He plays king d6. Magnus takes the pawn on b7, and now he splits the 2 rooks. So he's threatening king takes rook. Magnus takes another pawn. Now it's almost looking tenable for White. White now has a rook and 4 pawns. That's supposed to be 9 points, I believe, for 3 knights. 9 points. Seems like Magnus has made a tremendous comeback here, but being a Russian player, he's very familiar with the themes of domination like we've been studying in recent weeks. Bam! King c6. The rook is trapped. Nowhere to go. Nothing better than rook takes bishop, king takes, and then suddenly the material balance swings to +2 in black's favor, completely winning. Magnus actually resigned after king c6. So, of course, a Russian grandmaster is going to have full understanding of domination. And now, when I talk about Nepo being a wild, crazy attacking player, I think this game totally epitomizes that comment. And this was played very recent. This is 2020 Rapid Championship. Nepo's white, Magnus is black, and we get a Sicilian defense. Takes, knight out, and Magnus plays a very reputable double-edged Najdorf. So, you might expect bishop g5, bishop c4, the old Sozin, pawn bishop e3 and f3 or something. But rook to g1, bam, and full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes, and bam, the e-pawn's attack, don't worry about it, you sacrifice it. Well, Magnus, of course, loves to take pawns, but now a4, just a quiet positional move. Now Magnus plays e5, probably expecting that knight to move, but again, bam, pawn takes pawn. Now it's not totally clear to me what the ramifications are if Magnus takes the pawn, the knight on d4. I imagine queen takes, attacks the bishop. Probably some kind of pawn takes pawn down here. It's a scramble. He gets 2 or 3 pawns. Has trouble moving this bishop because the queen will bite on g7. Totally wild and crazy stuff. Well, in the game, Magnus declines taking the piece and plays bishop e7. But now rook to g4. I mean, to me, this is like an almost unfathomable way to play chess. Well, pawn takes. Now you got to trade check first. Okay, knight bear. And now, of course, you don't have time for rook takes bishop because the rooks are vis-a-vis. And if you trade rooks, he can just recapture, probably with the bishop. So white plays bishop d2. I mean, to me, this is crazy. You have a piece on pre, and you just play a quiet, half-developing move, and let him have the piece. But now you are threatening to play rook takes bishop. Well, Magnus pulls his bishop back, knight into f5, castles. And to me, again, I'm looking at this position. I'm like, white's king side is shattered. I have no idea how he's going to get in against the black king. And it's like a complete mystery to me. Okay, so what's the pawn count? White has 5, black has 5. So after all that, it is equal material. But Nepo shows a way. He trades rooks. Don't have to worry about those guys. And then simply rook to h4. Well, I guess if black plays bishop takes g5, I guess queen g4 looks pretty tasty. Okay. So he plays g6. Now, of course, on rook g4, the threat is crudity at its finest. Queen h5, queen takes h7, checkmate, see ya. So, g6. Not to worry, queen g4 anyway. Now he plays knight c5. But, let's go back. Well, if he plays pawn takes, very easy, you could play queen takes. You threaten to recoup your piece with bishop takes d7 and be a pawn to the good, and you also have the very nasty queen takes h7, queen h8 mate, if queen h7 isn't mate. So, the knight is actually immune, so queen g4, great move. Well, knight to c5, queen back to h3. I mean, this is about as crude as it gets. You're just lining them up. Now suddenly the attack is unstoppable. Well, Magnus tries pawn to h5, but then came rook takes h5, pawn takes, queen takes, and Magnus played knight e6 and resigned. Well, why did he resign? I think he saw that g6 was about to be planted on the board. Queen g6, of course, threatens, bam, checkmate. What can you do? If you take that, queen takes check. Notice you can't interpose on g7. He'll just take it. And then
check,
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 check.
Take that, king back, and then you probably have a number of different moves that win here. For example, bishop d3 threatens queen h7 mate. That's probably the easiest. And then on bishop d3, e4 can be met by the nasty bishop to c3 check. When I was inputting the game, I gave this move, which at the time looked pretty good because you threatened queen g8 mate. But then afterwards I realized black can play bishop d5 and still fetch around a bit. Although then you could still play queen back to g6. Anyway, not only is white 2 pawns up, but it's just, and a piece, but it's just a matter of a few moves before he gets checkmated. So, yeah, this kind of guy, Nepo, definitely is TibMag 123 kind of, you know, hells for bells, sack everything, all-out attack type of player. Yeah, no pussyfooting around with isolated pawns trying to pile up and win them. Although, that said, he can play technically, and he does play in games very well. So, my view is that this guy is a very real, very talented, and a very, very dangerous opponent for Magnus. And as we said, in classical games, 6 games, well, 4-1 with 6 draws. So that's already a pretty good sample size, relatively speaking. So that's what, about 10 games, 11 games, he's got +3 against Magnus Carlsen. Not too many players in the world have that kind of score against Magnus Carlsen, to be sure. So he's definitely a danger. He's not going to be intimidated. He's tremendous experience. Like when we look at the games in the database, they start from around 2001, and he's got like 2,000 games. 2-time Soviet Championship champion winner, won several youth tournaments, so there's no question the talent level is there. So he's definitely, you know, a real threat. Now, if that wasn't enough, about a week ago, we start to see a headline: Russian chess grandmaster uses Zor's supercomputer to train for tournaments. Now, I'm not too familiar with this Zor supercomputer, but it looks to me like it is a Russian defense-owned supercomputer. And apparently, it's extremely powerful, and he was using it even to train for the candidates matches, which may partially explain his improvement in play. So, following that, a few days later, then we saw an article about Magnus Carlsen saying that he's going to maybe get a new team of seconds, or maybe beef up his current team for the match. Good question. So when is the match? It's already been announced that it will be in Abu Dhabi. It'll be from November 24th to December 16, and I believe it's going to be 14 games at the classical time control. After that, they start to move towards faster time controls. So I think T-Mag123 hit the nail on the head when he said, whoever wins, it's going to be some exciting chess. Magnus was very pragmatic about it. He said, look, I've known him a long time. He's got a plus score against me, even if you count the games after 2012. And he said that, you know, looks forward to the real challenge. And so they have this immediate crypto tournament coming up. But then right after that, I'm sure both sides are going to start really focusing in, because this is going to be a battle. So, okay, that concludes the presentation, the preview of the Neapimignacci Magnus Carlsen World Championship match coming up. And now we'll go ahead and /open, and maybe we can get in a few games. But first, I'm going to go ahead and take a few minutes restroom break, then I'll be right back. Go ahead and send some challenges. Maybe Sandro can put the command in there so that people can go ahead and do a few challenges. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, no, Karpov's second is way too old and out of touch, but thank you for the thought. Okay, so, okay, I think I'm open for challenges. /open. Okay, so we got to do it again. Open. Okay, let's just go out there and see who's around.
Incoming challenge.
Oh, we got a challenge here. Nezhmednov. Okay.
Game
I
started.
was hoping I'd get white. Okay, no such luck. Okay. Yeah, he played F4 on me last time. He was ready to play d4. Now e5 is an interesting move. Try to put the clamp down on the d4 pawn break. And notice that we weaken the d5 square, but this knight, the pawn on c3, keeps the knight from coming to c3. So now this knight needs to go here so that we keep an eye on that d4 square. And now the game's kind of a King's Indian attack for white, except the knight's on e2. I think I need a little jacket here. It seems a little chilly in here. Yeah, so far this is not near as much fun as a Latvian Gambit. Well, I looked at that game last week and gosh, you were killing me. I was lucky to survive, to say the least. Now this is an interesting challenge. I guess we could take a chill pill here. You always have to watch for f5 pawn sacks here. Oh, now he's all in. Okay, let's take that. Now, a couple of ways to play here. Oh, why not take? Why not take? Famous last words. Why not take? At least now when we get checkmated we have a pawn to show. Okay. Go ahead and castle. I see. So much for my comment about him not having c3 for his knight. Now suddenly he has c3 for his knight. But it did cost him a pawn. Okay, so now I was thinking in this scenario we should pop out with the bishop to g4, and you can see it's all about the fight for the d4 square. So there, interesting choice. We could play the more dynamic pawn captures or the more routine bishop takes. Let's take with the pawn, violate every principle known to mankind about double pawns, pawn structure, and such good stuff. Well, here I was thinking to take this and then put the queen to work this way. And now we definitely have some. Now there, I thought there was a tactical issue with that. One, I could play d3 check straight away. But two, I thought we could also do it this way. Take here on e2 and
check.
Hit him with the old discovered check. And that was one of the points, and then hit him with the Pinsky. And that looks pretty good.
White resigns.
Okay, good game, sir. I think the best move I made was getting black, so I didn't have to face the Latvian Gambit there. Okay. So, seems like we're waiting for a few more people to show up. Sandro, could you post the command for people that want to challenge? Trying to think where I have it. Oh, I know I have it in one of our previous chats. Let's see. Yeah, so probably in that game, this d4 move was probably a bit ambitious. What would be better? Maybe chilling with d3, bishop e3, knight bd2, pawn to a4, the usual KIA type stuff. Okay, that might have been a more stable approach. Let's see. I'm trying to find the command here.
Incoming challenge.
Aha. Now this is dangerous because I'll probably
Game
get white.
started.
What happens on e4 again? And what does he do on knight c3? I was curious about this. He plays there anyway. But now if I take, I mean, isn't this just a King's Gambit Fisher defense with an extra move for white? Yeah. King's Gambit Fisher defense. Well, would I put the knight here or do I put it on here? Nobody plays like this anymore. I think we can go here. I forget if the knight's supposed to go to f6 though, or e7. The things we forget when we get old. Aha. So now, I see, it's pretty clear, the usual, if I play pawn takes pawn, yeah, I'll be another pawn up. He'll play pawn to d4. Don't know that that really gets him much, but why do I need to get involved? Now, of course, I'll look at this afterwards, the computer will be like, why didn't you just play? But whatever. Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, so / match hen chess 50. That's the command. Okay. Well, do we want to trade these guys or no? Or do we want to go here or there? Does pinning make much difference? I'm confused. I need to get rid of that e4 pawn. That's what I need to do. And now that's a smart move on his part, because if I play rook b1, that kind of takes queenside castling off the table. I'm going to play this little a3 move. Nope, I'm not. Because when he takes on b2, and I play knight a4, he has queen b5. Right.
Server announcement.
Okay. Play rook b1. Now he can argue the rook is not well placed on b1, and he'd be right. But the queen on b6 is not so fantastic as well. So, tit for tat. I guess I'm going to have to bite the bullet. Ah, I see. When I castle kingside, he wants to play bishop b8 and queen c7. That's his evil plan. Aha. Now we understand what he wants. Gotcha. Okay, be that as it may, I think we can still do this. e3 won't have the same impact that it had last week, I hope. Okay, so we're not afraid of that. We stopped his checkmate nonsense. Let's get out of town. We are out of here. I have a dream of playing f3 and chipping away at his business one day, but maybe not when he's still pinning me. Anyway, I much prefer I have that diagonal than him. Okay, let's see where this guy lives. I can't believe he's going to give up the dark squared bishop. But the other choice is e7. Probably not so happy. So, wow. Now, of course, well, just take, taking with the queen's not bad. That saves the knight to go the other way. Yeah, let's take with the queen. Why not? Keeps a little clamp down there. At some point, I would think he's going to play pawn to g6. Pawn to e6? What is that? That's borderline illegal. I thought he was going to play g6 to try and chip away at my bish. So, well, what next? Let's just get out of the way, and then we'll get the show on the road with the f-pawn to try and break in. Or maybe we don't even need it. Well, at some point we need to open a file. But yeah, moves like bishop e5. Okay, I'm thinking, okay, let's get this guy over here. Totally not clear why I didn't pin that knight. Okay, the time situation's good. Yeah, should have pinned that knight. Yeah, there's the old kamikaze. If I take, he's taken with the knight. But let's just knock this guy out first. Take that guy.
Check.
Run over here. Okay, he's still giving it the old college try. Guess we better get over here. We may have to give something back here. Okay, let's
Server announcement.
Nishmednov notwithstanding. Okay, where's the mate? Don't see the mate. Okay, he can go up there.
Black resigns.
And we can go check. Check. Yeah, I was going to play queen e2, then on rook f4, we can hit him with a check. If he drops back, we check again, take over the initial. Anyhow, good game, sir. But that was definitely better than last week's experience. You were killing me last week. Boy, I analyzed it afterwards, and I think you just had a couple of forced mates at some point. I mean, you played brilliant attacking game last week. So anyhow, I guess we'll go ahead and go see who's out there. What time are we looking at? 7:04? What time did we start? Go ahead and see who's out there. See if we can get a game. Click on the ball. Get a little Gator-ator. So I think we're missing Coach Connor tonight. He's usually a show here. And a number of my friends, like Foxy Opening, didn't make it.
Incoming challenge.
Okay,
Game started.
now I get black. I feel safer playing black. Although I'm not sure that's a great idea, but let's see. Yeah, this variation. Some tricky stuff here. So now we have kind of a French, where at least I've managed to get my light squared bishop out. And so it's not buried back here on c8. So I think black's reasonably comfortable here. Yes, of course, white has more space. You know, I get that. Now the question is, someone like Sire 1 was great on these positions. I guess we could castle, but yeah, Sire 1 and Karpov love these kind of positions with black. On the other hand, Nigel Short, guys like Grishik, like white. So what can you say? Chess has varying taste. Well, there, I feel we just have to go after this guy. But now what? Now, well, let's go in here. But he's definitely going to try to whip up some attack, no question there. So now I just need a move or two to consolidate here. And he's not giving it to me, he's keeping me busy. Now a move like Queen d5 looks very tempting, but then he's got the rebuttal with Knight f4. Actually, Bishop a3 had some interest. It plays a little bit like a Grunfeld.
Server announcement.
But I may get a passed queenside pawn. But that's chess. You get, you give. That's the way it goes. Oh, good question. On pawn takes there, I'd just been thinking to play knight takes. Yeah, why not? But there might be some argument for taking with the pawn and keeping more stuff on the board. Yeah, the argument would be he would play bishop d2 and probably win my pawn. It's a little fragile as is. But in principle, opening the queen side should be advantageous for me because from a strategic perspective, it keeps him occupied. And if he's occupied, he's not checkmating me on the king side, we hope. That would be the thought, as it were. Now I could see a move like queen b3, rook a3, queen takes b5, knight takes e3, f takes e3, rook takes e3. Then all the pawns are on one side of the board, but it feels like his king should be a little bit more exposed. Now here, okay, let's play takes. Queen d5, think about taking the pawn on f3. On knight c3, I'm thinking I can play queen takes f3, knight takes b5, knight takes e3, and bop his king side around a bit. My queen on d5, as long as she can stay there, feels pretty good. For example, I get this tempo. Now there's no back rank mate. Ooh, rook a2. Fascinating. In the words of the great Dr. Spock. Fascinating. Then on knight c3, I have knight takes e3 check. King back, queen in. Rook c3 is just too exciting not to play. I mean, he could play other moves for sure, but let's give it a shot. Am I being a little too frisky here? Whew. Bam, he did it. He forked
Check.
me. He said he wouldn't, and then he forked me. Well, on king g3, I have knight takes f1 check. I mean, anyway, that was the plan. Don't see the brilliancy with bishop h4 check. On knight f5, he's got the very nice queen takes f5. So
check.
Process of elimination. Play knight takes check. I was hoping for knight takes rook, and then queen takes f3 check. So now, what to do? Well, here, I think we just got to, well, queen takes, knight takes, can grab a couple of pawns, bishop check, queen takes, 2 pawns up. That looks pretty good. Do we like that better than just queen in to b3, knight takes, takes, takes? Yeah, that might actually be better. Takes, check. If I take here, he takes there. Then I can throw in the bishop check or just play queen takes check. He goes there. Then we can go somewhere like queen here. Or a couple of pawns up. Bishop check, queen takes. Let's do it. The other, with the bishop, I would still have to try and break in.
Check.
I'm sure when I look at this afterwards, computers will say, you did this all wrong, Ron, as usual. But I have to say, this looks pretty safe.
Check.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A solid 2 pawns up. Check.
Check.
Safer king. Check.
Check.
Get to take the pawn. Make a little breathing room for our king. His knight is... idiot. Queen b2. A little domination. Okay, let's go ahead and... push... No. Duh. Hit him with the battery. Duh. As Ben Larson said, not illegal to threaten mate in 1. Boom.
White resigns.
Yes, queen takes knight check, trade queens, pawn to b1 equals queen in a few moves. Well, good game, sir. Yeah, that rook a2 was that was a tricky move.
Incoming challenge.
It looks like it's just you and me tonight, buddy. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, I guess one more game, and then we'll let Sandro and
game
get a little sleep.
Started.
Okay, what to do about the Latvian gambit? You play b3. There you go. Although I have to say the last game was not bad. I had a Fischer defense to the king's gambit with a tempo in hand, so that was definitely a better experience than our game last week, which was a total nightmare. Now what are we doing? We're going hippo on him. Oh, king stopped at f-pawn. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Good point, sir. Good point. Do. Now, I saw something where Wesley So said, not said, he did a video talking about the B3 as a serious weapon. And I was wondering, that kind of explains why so many people have been playing this B3 lately. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Because I've been running into it a lot. I'm not sure about that one. Oh, but here we got to take this. Gots to take that guy. Although, it's a game. So now here's the challenge. Is he going to really try to castle queenside? I think that would be somewhat problematic. Oh, bam! Well, somewhat problematic it is. Bam! In your face, Ron. He just, in your face, castled. Aha! Which brings to mind, what are you doing with your king, sir? Good question. Good question. Yeah, I'm a little far away from... Meowza. Oh boy, this guy has no holds barred chess. Bam! I play... Oh, he's got some bishop e4 check at some moment. That's the ticket. Although, I have to say, color me skeptical about all this. But then I'm always skeptical right up to the moment where they announce checkmate. Or just simply play it. So if I go knight takes, he goes takes, he throws in a bishop check. Dude's got a lot of development. And he moves his queen to some inconspicuous place. Well, I'm not from the show me state, whichever one that is. What is that, Missouri or something? But I got to see this. I could even go bishop b4 check right away. Why not? Okay, that's it. I'm out of here. I am out of here. Ooh. Bishop takes f6. Serious consideration there. Admit their idea that I get the f4 square. Now, another idea that comes up in these type of situations, okay, he didn't go for it. Oh, wow. He's tempting me with more pawns. Is there anything I need to worry about here, besides everything? What I was going to say is knight takes, pawn takes, queen e7, pawn takes on c6, rook takes queen, pawn takes on b7 check is a very thematic type of pawn sack that comes up many times. What is the checkmate plan that he's going for here? I mean, it's pretty clear he's going to try to checkmate me. Oh, he's going to get rid of my knight, and then he's going to do some kamikaze, knight takes f2. Well, before all that happens, let's do this. You know, just before he checkmates me, let's just see what we can do about that. Aha! I was wondering about that. Le pointois being that if I go, but I mean, I still don't think all this is checkmate. But if I go pawn takes, what's he going to sack? Is he going to sack the bishop? Oh, he could sack the knight with tempo on my queen, and then when I take it, then he's... But then queen e3 doesn't really quite cut the mustard. Bishop takes, not too impressive. I'm taking all his pieces. Yep, color me skeptical once again. Now if I go queen takes, though, he does have knight e7. But then that still seems to not quite Very skeptical about all this. And what's happening on pawn takes? Knight takes f2, rook takes f2, bishop takes e3, pawn takes knight. If queen takes, I got... Oh, I just am not buying this for black. Okay, got that. Simplest solution actually is just to take this and this. But I'm still like totally skeptical about all this. I just want to take. When he takes, take. Take, take. Very dubious about all this. But the simplest solution probably is bishop takes knight. Doing. Be pragmatic. Romance is dead. That's probably just the simplest, most cutthroat approach. Just attacker elimination. Now bishop f2, rook takes. Don't even get my king's hair messed up. Here,
check.
Don't even throw in this check just to be annoying. And we can take that guy. And it's getting very expensive for the black team. And he still hadn't laid a glove on my king.
Check.
Okay, there it is. Okay. Don't panic. Okay, where's he going next? Oh, he wants to play rook down there. Okay, I got it. I got it. Well, let's just shred his king position first before we get too worried. Now rook d2 is conveniently met by queen c8 checkmate. That should end the French resistance. And here,
check.
Of course, bishop g7 was pretty tasty, but just be a spoil sport. Just ruin his fun.
Check.
I know, I'm
Black resigns.
not being much fun there. Anyhow, I guess maybe we'll go do a couple of practice and improve things here, and then we will call it a day. Let's see. So we have
incoming challenge.
Okay, one more game.
Game
Then we'll call
started.
What does he do against the Cairo Khan? He's probably got something crazy. God, I haven't looked at this in years. Wow, that's really quick.
Check. Check.
Maybe 95 last move. But then I guess queen b5, but then knight c3, queen a6, trade queens. Here, I'm going to go for this type of setup. Start a little bit of pressure. You can't just let white play b4, b5 and get those queenside pawns rolling without generating some kind of counterplay somewhere. Now, we could potentially trade and then try to play b6, and at least that's less dangerous than him doing this other. The other option is to play super aggressive with pawn to f5. Both are reasonable. Let's go for it. Probably regret it later, but now that knight's kind of anchored in there, for better or for worse. Okay. Time to skedoodle. Okay, so there it is. He's threatening to go there. b4. If we play a move like a5, then he has knight to a4. Now we could trade, but then when we trade, we strengthen his center. We could play here. There's also a tactic with this and this. Well, he can't go b4 until he does something about the Charlie 3 knight. But he could play queen b3. Okay, a lot to think about. This is how I get into trouble. Why don't we just play b3? That's kind of a wuss out approach. The more manly approach was to play... What was the more manly approach? It was to play knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and then knight e5. And here we got to take. Then we got to take. Then we got to take. And we got to take a pawn. Now, of course, in a perfect world, I would have already had my pawn on e6 and life would be good, but take what we can. We avoided the big bind. I'm not sure the pawn on e6 is such a humongous plus for him or a problem for me, but well, now, of course, oh, well, now I can play pawn up, and we get a double rook ending. If he takes, take with a queen. Or I could just play pawn d4. And then his rook could go he could go there and there. Go for the pass pawn. I'm sure later the computer will tell me I should have put a rook on d8 or some such. Okay, so we got one solid extra pawn. Ooh, nasty. He wants to get to the queen of d5 check. Connect those. That could have been annoying. Now we're kind of in a technical phase. I thought for sure he was going to... Okay, so now we can go this way. So yeah, now we're in a bit of a technical phase where I think we got pretty good prospects. Now, do we trade? Why not?
Check.
Well, in principle, not sure we root. Queen endings, in fact, generally are like the worst. But, gotta play the game. Got to play the game. King safety's not so great. Okay, let's just give him a tickle, try to encourage him to trade. He's willing to trade, but only on his terms. Okay, and then he's got to move like queen back to there. Very clever play. Okay, and if we play g5, he goes there, we take, take, take. If he takes, we can take there. Okay, let's play this. Yeah, a bit of a technical phase here. Now I'm counting on, if he plays queen b1, being able to trade and take on f4. Because if I take on f4, it also weakens e5. Now that's a smart play on his part. Let's play king up. Not sure about this, but not sure where my king goes here in all these scenarios. And the more open the board gets, the more chances he has for counterplay. Okay, time is an issue. Now we have some possibilities of thinking about switching gears. Okay, finally acquiesced to playing the endgame. But, of course, it's not easy. Okay, but now we get into
check.
Your check. Now he's got some challenges. Now, of course, if we can trade queens without altering the pawn structure, game over. So the question here, if he goes king g3, we go queen c3, trade, trade. He can't trade. What's he going to do to get counterplay? On queen f3, I'm perfectly happy to trade. I should
check.
be able to... And this should be pretty relatively easy to win. I could even walk the king up the king side, because he can't keep an eye on the d pawn. So, oh, tricky guy. Okay. Yeah, see, he was going to play a5 when I got all the way over there. Won't be so easy for him to lock it up on this side, though. Not so easy. At the right moment, we'll give him the d pawn, deflecting from the h pawn. It's technical overdrive, as Magnus would say, if he'd thought of it. Plus, he's got the weakness on f4. Okay. Yeah, he's not going to be able to defend, or as my friend Walter
White
used to
resigns.
say, can't dance at two weddings there. Anyway, very good game, sir. Totally glad you showed up. We got to play quite a bit of training games, and appreciate ICC sponsoring the event.
Incoming challenge.
And we will see everyone next week. Have to take care of a few things, and appreciate the games. And yeah, we could play all night. That's what we used to do at the old Houston Chess Club. So once again, thanks to ICC. Hope everyone enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week, same time. Thank you, and good night.